start to chat, and then I feel that if you have questions or anything that you want to share at any point, please just get in there. So this can be quite informal. It's really nice. It's a number of people such that we can all see one another on the screen. So if you want to speak, feel like you can be old-fashioned and wave, we can still do that. Or if you want to put like a little hand wave reaction from Zoom, or just say, put your question or thought in the chat, that works too. But lovely to hear as many people as wish to contribute. So Joe, I guess, I mean, is it interesting to maybe start by talking about how we ended up, the two of us, working on this piece together? Would that be a good starting point?
I think so, yeah, it would be great.
Fantastic. So I was, at the time of starting to work on this piece, I was working for an educational theatre company in Dublin. So by educational theatre here, we mean we were touring shows around schools. And I was having this like spectacularly poor record in my dating life. So I used to come into work every day and like tell everyone these stories. So we'd be rehearsing. I'd be like, you want to know what happened last night? Like, it was really bad. And so with the woman who produced that company, we just thought, let's just start staying late. We have a studio space. Let's just play with these stories. Let's take the stories out to play. And we thought we were working on a very comic piece. So we thought it was going to be really light and really fun and high energy comedy. And then the more I dug into this kind of crucial question, and Joe, I didn't know that you had this idea yet, but Joe has this concept that I really love, where you often make theater because you have a question you're trying to answer, don't you? And you told me that much later, but I think when I think back to the beginning, I was trying to answer the question, how does a woman who considers herself to be quite confident and has read every book on feminism and fights for social justice, how does this person, as in this person, how does this end up in an abusive relationship? And that I was really kind of, you know, as I put myself back together again, coming out of that relationship, that was the question that I was so curious about. And I thought, this is a really important question because I'm not the only one. And the more honest I got about how bad that relationship had been, the more people told me about difficult relationships that they had been. So I thought, okay, there's really something to dig into here. So as we were telling the lighthearted stories, I kept hitting that story, you know, and I was like, oh, really? Do I have to go into that? Like, can't we do the lighthearted piece? But I think, I'm sure, I know there's, you know, everybody on the call is a creator in some way. And, you know, you get those ideas that keep knocking, and you know you're not going to get off the hook. Like, you know, you've got to sit down and make the thing. So it was one of those. And when I realized that, I thought I really need a collaborator, a strong collaborator. And Joe, you've also introduced me to a concept later on. But I think looking back, this is part of why I was so drawn to working with you. You've introduced me to this idea of a theraturg, like the dramaturg who also really takes care of you and has a kind of a therapeutic role. So I was in Dublin and I was like, I really need a really good director dramaturg. And I kept meditating, kind of going, who is that person? And I kept getting the answer that the person was Joe. And then my practical mind was like, that's really inconvenient. Joe's in New York, I'm in Dublin. How are we going to do that? Now, obviously, today that now seems quite normal to make a show between Dublin and New York. But at the time, it seemed really strange. But I called Joe, and yeah, and Joe, you went for it. Thank goodness. Thank goddess. So what happened on your end?
Well, so Jenny called me, or you know, we started to talk about it, and I had just finished a not particularly pleasant experience directing a project, and I had said I wasn't going to direct anymore. Like, I'd made this decision in my mind, I was going to focus on writing, and then, but Jenny and I had known each other from the teaching that we do together through the community engaged course that happens in Ireland through NYU. And we had always said, oh, it would be really interesting to make something together, and there hadn't been an opportunity. And so when Jenny asked me to do this, I thought, okay, great. I hadn't directed a one-person show before, and I really wanted to work with Jenny. So I said yes. And I'm, you know, super happy that I did, because I learned so much from working on the project with her. And it's interesting. It set me up. Working with her on this project set me up to do work that I do now that's very different from this, but I don't think I'd be doing that work had Jenny and I not worked together. So it's a really important milestone for me in my career, this project with Jenny. So.
Yeah, and I think the distance really helped us, didn't it? Because we had then these really intensive periods of time where like Joe would come here for a week or I would go to New York for a couple of weeks. And we had that kind of made that luxury, like what now seems so luxurious. I think it's really one of the best ways to make work, but we rarely do it now, do we? Like just really focusing on one thing. But we would really, really focus. And so much of our time together, Joe, was story sharing, wasn't it? And I hope that that went both ways, because I mean, something I really learned making this piece, especially from when I first started playing with it, and it really was just me on my own. And actually I was thinking the past couple of days rehearsing in here by myself, I was like, oh, it's like the beginning when I had this idea and I was kind of talking to the mirror. But actually it doesn't work for very long, because I really believe stories need a witness, and stories need to be heard. So as I tried to find this piece, and I did go away and write, but a lot of the time I was talking to Joe, and Joe was really hearing. And then Joe would tell a story back. Like Joe would go, gosh, that's interesting that you had that experience, because something like that happened to me in this way. So Joe and I did that with the two of us. And then every time we've performed the show, audiences have really wanted to talk after. And I've always loved that about this piece. I tend to get to know the audiences really well. First Fortnight built that into their program. You know, they chose spaces where you got to know the audience. As I said, we were in a residential mental health center, and I went back the week after the show and I did workshops with people who came to see the show. And some people actually came more than one night, which was really lovely. I would often see people in the cafe the day of the show, or we were rehearsing in there. So I kind of got to know people. I felt like I was in a community putting the work on. And that really informed Solo Sirens, and Jen and Jennifer Webster and Martha Knight are the producer and the assistant producer of Solo Sirens. And one of the things we're really trying to do with that festival and that project is treat our audiences as a community. So actually really get to know them and interact with them, rather than have them be like these passive observers who like buy a ticket and come for one night. We're trying to really, really get to know the audiences. And yeah, and there's something about the personal story, I think. And in fact, Dublin's a very small town, and after the first show, several times in Dublin, I was just like in a cafe or walking around, and somebody would say to me, sorry, like I hope it's okay to ask, or I hope I'm not bothering you, but are you the person who did that show Enthroned? Because I had a similar experience and I want to say thank you, or it made me feel very empowered. And that was incredible. I mean, I'd never had that as a performer. Like that was just an incredible experience to have. So I'm so glad actually that people did feel like they could come and share that with me. It was great. I'm just pausing because I want to leave space if people need space, but we can keep going. But if anyone has a question or comment, just please feel that you can ask or say.
Joe, I have a question, because I know you touched upon this in a previous conversation. Uh, as a director and dramaturg, how were you able to reconcile your positionality as a man, helping to tell a woman's story?
It's a great question, Tetsuro, and
it comes up a lot, doesn't it? You've been asked this before.
It was, so Jenny hadn't finished the piece, right? So I didn't know what the piece was ultimately about. I knew we had conversations about the relationships, and our first 2-week workshop was here at NYU and in the summer, and we kind of in that storytelling way, we got a pack of note cards, and Jenny kind of walked me through these various stories. and then we did a work, like an invited sharing of the first, I guess, Jenny, what was it, 30 minutes, I think, of it at the end of that 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then Jenny went away and wrote for 2 months, and then I went to Ireland and we worked through the final section of the piece. And the part of the piece about that Jenny sort of landed on around the link of the abuse to the series of relationships, that was not in the first 30 minutes. And so when I arrived in Dublin, and that was in the latter half of the piece more clearly, you know, more, it was in the beginning, sorry, it was in the first 30 minutes, but not as clearly articulated, right? And so, and I think in our original conversations, and I promise you I'm going to answer your question, I'm getting to the actual question, but like the discovery of what the piece was about required me to do a lot of listening, which I don't think is terribly, is often not associated with male directors, right? In a lot of ways, that would be a critique. And so, but as a dramaturg, some of you probably know the work of Cecily O'Neill, the drama and education practitioner. She's also an amazing dramaturg, and she refers to the dramaturg in a new play as the midwife of the play and playwright. And so, and I take that really seriously, as the dramaturg, but particularly when I'm working with a playwright on a new play, that it's not about me. Like this process was not about me. It was about whatever I could do with Jenny to help her sort of bring this story to an audience. And so, yes, I was very aware that as a man, I was working through that, like my body and my positionality would potentially, if I erase my individuality, is what causes what happened to Jenny at various moments in her life, right? But I also sort of invested in the fact that I think through my own therapeutic process, where my therapist is a man, I think that maybe it needed to be a man that was working with Jenny on this project, right? To sort of, I described in our conversation that we have a certain intimacy from making this piece together, right? And I think that for me, I guess I would say it's an important intimacy that we have. And I feel that reflected back when we're working together. And so I often wonder if, like, how would the piece be different if it was directed by a woman, right? I don't know whether Tetsura, that was very good at answering your question. I kind of went down a rabbit hole, but those are my thoughts.
No, that was terrific. That was terrific.
Yeah.
Jenny?
I might add something to it too, Joe, which I think is really interesting. That, I mean, you and I both do a lot of facilitation, and it affects the way we direct. Like, I think we direct in a similar way because we do so much facilitation. And so I've often described you as like the me who's not me, you know, like, and I hope then that I'm the you who's not you for you in return. But I think in this piece that was so personal, I was like, I need the me who's not me, who's outside of me, to help me be more of me. And in this case, that was you. And I would say that that directing style that we have is feminine, but I don't think feminine is always housed in a certain form of body. So when we direct, both of us leave a lot of, we hold space, you know, even that gesture is considered to be very feminine, right? It's kind of the womb, the space. We listen a lot. Bye, Monica. Thanks for being here. So we listen, we listen, we hold space, we reflect. Midwife, I mean, you use the word midwife, it's a word that is associated again with women, but that process doesn't have to be housed in a female body. And I think there's something very healing about working with a man on this piece. And there was a lovely young man, I've told this story so many times, but there was a young man at St. Patrick's Hospital where we first performed, and he was living in the hospital at the time, and we were using the gym for the performance space because it had a bit of a raised space that you could make into a stage. So he was around and he was like doing chin-ups in the trees outside and stuff. And I said to him, like, listen, we're in your space, we're in your gym, like just come use the machines. Like I'm just rehearsing, but just, it's fine. If you don't mind me talking to myself, I don't mind you like being on the cross trainer. And so he was like there often, like working out, and I was rehearsing. And then after a while he said to me, so can anyone come and see your show? And I said, yeah, anyone can come. And I really hope that you do. And he said, but is it kind of a woman thing? And I said, well, it's about me and I'm a woman, but I hope that there's many things that anybody could connect with or relate to. And then he said, okay, well, my mom and my aunt always come and visit on Friday night, and I never know what to do with them. So I'm going to bring them to your show. So I was like, great, okay. And then that Friday night, he and his mom and his aunt were in the front row. And he was such a beautiful audience member. Like he was just beaming love at me. And it was the first couple of shows still. So I was still really finding my feet with it. And it was quite terrifying for me to present something so personal, especially in Dublin, where most of my professional life is housed. So all kinds of people from like, it was, lots of industry people or people that I facilitated in community groups were coming. Anyway, he was like the love beam. And then after he said, show's really good. It's really good. Yeah. And it's not just a woman thing. And then he came back the next Sunday. So he came on the Friday night with his mom and his aunt, and then he came on his own on Sunday afternoon. So I guess like I've always had this little tagline in my head about Enthroned ever since, like, it's not just a woman thing. Like, and woman things are very important. Like I'm all about woman things, and Solo Sirens is a festival that amplifies women's voices. So I wanted to do Enthroned in conjunction with other female artists who were writing and performing their own work. So that's where Solo Sirens kind of connects. But I think this question, it's not just about women and men, is it? I mean, it's about all of us being able to be who we actually are. And for some of us, that's not the physical form that we're in. And there's all kinds of other people in society whose voices aren't heard for all kinds of reasons. So I think ultimately this piece is about like, what do you have to say and what does it take to say it? And I think that applies in contexts beyond gender, and certainly it applies in terms of gender. I mean, certainly patriarchy makes it hard for women to say a lot of things.
I'd like to invite if anyone else has a comment or a question they'd like to share with Jenny and Joe, or our special guest today. If not, or if you're more inclined to type it into the chat, that's also fine. Maybe while you're thinking of that question, I'll just jump in with another one. Jenny, your work is so deeply personal, and Joe, I know one of your specialties is the autoethnographic. Tell me about the experience of having your family see it, or preventing them from see it. I mean, what? I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, I've always wondered, like, would I have made this piece in Toronto? Like it was when I first did it, it was in Dublin. So none of my family are here. And they were so supportive. They were incredible. We did this fundraising campaign called Audience from Afar, where like people could buy tickets to opening night. So it's kind of perfect because they could, they sent love and support. But they weren't actually there. So that was great. And then they kept saying to me, so what's it about? What's it about? And I was like, oh, it's like these stories from my life. And, and then with First Fortnight in January, like when it was on film, I was like, oh, okay, now we're doing a film show. And Jen and Martha will know that like every day I was having this question of like, who am I going to invite, and what I settled on this time, one of my brothers came, my sister came, and my nephew came. I'm really delighted that my nephew came. He's 24 now. He was 23 then. And I had, with my nephew, the big thing was I said to him, I'm going to talk about sex. And he was so cool. He was like, yeah, well, like, I presume, like, I presume you have it, and I was like, yeah, but I'm going to really graphically talk about me and sex. And he was like, yeah. He was totally unfazed by that. I was like, okay, great. The world is changing, things are moving on. But yeah, it was hard for my brother and my sister. They're still talking to me about it. Yeah, they're still processing some stuff from it. And I'm glad I stuck with the instinct to just invite them to that one. I've got that film now. So I would love for my parents and everyone in my family to see it, but I wanted to do that step by step. And there's this danger because of course you change stuff to tell a story. Of course, you tweak things and adjust things. So there's that line like the boy across the street. He's one of my least favorite things. That used to be my brother. I mean, both my brothers are great people, but I used to say like my brother's one of my least favorite things, because it is true that he used to call me fat when he was like a little kid. But does he actually need to hear that as an adult now? I mean, that actually felt really cruel. So when I knew it was going to be online, I was like, I need to change that line. Like, I need to protect some people a little.
Did your brother
And
win? I'm just curious that, oh, thank you for protecting me, or did he just think, oh, it must have been the kid across the street?
I think he just thought it was the kid across the street. Yeah. Yeah. I don't think he, now my sister keeps texting me because there's a line about her too. And it's just too funny. The line is too funny. So I couldn't cut it. And she's really upset about it. She's like, did I really say that? And I said, oh no, I was just trying to get the idea, because it's about her telling me when I was going to high school not to, what is it? Tomorrow's my first day of secondary school, and I wanted to go with my sister, but she says if I look at her, talk to her, or tell anyone that I know her, she'll kill me, which actually is true. Like, my sister told me not to hang out with her at all and not to tell anyone I knew her. Now she's an amazing sister. Like, we have these moments, don't we? But she's still feeling bad about that one. So anyway, it was a good test. It was a good test to have 3 of them online. And I think for my parents, there will need to be some prior discussion. It wouldn't be fair actually just to invite them to it. I don't think, without preparing them a bit. So step by step, one step at a time, as the play says.
Um, I love how you and Joe are so self-deprecating about how, oh, you thought that doing rehearsal or developing a show from between Dublin and New York was quite innovative, and of course it is. And then now that Zoom has come along, this is what everyone is doing. But I have to say, I have a slightly different opinion on that. That in that, I noticed that between you and Joe, whenever it's just a remarkable affinity that you two share. And I'm wondering, and also your use of space, the props, the frame, the living room. It seems to me, while the rest of us are figuring out how to pivot to Zoom, so to speak, your so-called head start really shows in terms of the shorthand you two have together creatively, just the way that you're able to, because Chris and I have been privy to that, just sort of prior to that, when the calls become public, so to speak. But I'm wondering if you could just speak to, in our remaining minutes, about what are some of the constraints and affordances that you have discovered within working with us in this peculiar environment? Because I think what you did with this adapted version of Enthroned for Zoom between you and Joe has just been really remarkable. Your degree of literacy in this area.
Mm-hmm.
So after we got off the call with y'all on, what was that, Thursday? Like, we stayed on for another probably 30 or 40 minutes. And then we worked, what did we work, Jenny, on Saturday for 2 hours,
Mm-hmm.
right? We sort of staged in Jenny's apartment for 2 hours on Zoom. And it was like super fun. Like, we had it was like two super fun hours on Zoom, which, like, Zoom is not fun, right? And like, we had I had a really good time, Jenny. I hope you had a good time. And it was just, I think there's been so much like sadness, anger, it's not, when is it going to get back to normal? All these feelings we're all having. And I feel like we've been trying to be more like, where are the opportunities? And so this was such an amazing opportunity to be able to play with an idea that has been rolling around in our minds for a really long time. So Jenny, maybe maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, and I saw Scott, you had your hand up there, didn't you? So I want to make sure to leave time for Scott's question. So just to say quickly, yeah, I mean, it was so much fun. So, and thank you so much again for asking us, because it gave us this opportunity to play in this way. And I think the filming of it that we did in January or in December, that Jen, Martha, and I worked on together in December for first fortnight, that really helped me with this Zoom version, because filming was tough at first, because I got so used to the audience really responds when I do the piece, you know, and I really talk to them, and I hand them things and I take things back from them, and it's like there's all this like with the audience. So the first time that that I went into like a COVID studio where I could only be in there on my own and just tried to do it for myself, I was like, oh, wow, okay, I'm missing that energy. But I started to really imagine people in the film, and then tonight was lovely because I could see you. Like this was easier in some way than filming. And we've always talked, I think, since the beginning, Joe, haven't we, about like the apartment version, because also because I really love this apartment. It's like a Georgian Dublin. It's like the kind of main, it would have been like the receiving room of a Georgian Dublin house, you know, so it's got the big fireplace and it's got the big windows. And so I've always felt like it sort of suits this queenly vibe. Queen very much in the archetypal sense, not in the political sense. So it was great. Like as soon as we realized in that call on Thursday, like that you were open to us really going to town and playing, it, like I've had such a fun couple of days, and thank you for that. Because I've also found, I'm sure other people in theater are finding this Zoom time and this online time has been much more sedentary, you know, so it was great to get on the feet and jump around and like, okay, how am I going to show them the props, and we got to use the fire, and you know, all that stuff. But I'll leave it at that. So Scott, I want to leave time for you.
Yeah, and just before we get to Scott's question, thank you for your patience, Scott. I realize we're coming up to the top of the hour, so if anyone has to go, please don't feel you're being rude. We want to be respectful of your time. If, on the other hand, you're able to stick around and enjoy this continuing conversation, please do. Scott, thank you for waiting. You have the floor.
No problem at all. Hi from Toronto, Jenny and Joe, of course. Yeah, nice to see a Torontonian. It's funny, we're such different places. I wanted to ask an audience question of you. My research is in audience research, and I'm in the first draft stage of some analysis of a group called Outside the March. They just did some performances, and I'm evaluating some of the responses there. And one of the things I thought was interesting was there's various sort of processes that audiences seem to engage in, but the most powerful one was what I'm calling the personally engaged processing. So somehow it relates back to me. I feel like there's a kind of intimacy around it, and also that there's something challenging about it, probably personally challenging. But what I thought was interesting is that people with theater backgrounds and theater training are the lowest on the scale of personally engaged processing. So I was kind of curious in your own responses, the responses you've received from audiences, two things. One is, do you find that there is a difference between how theater people and regular non-theater people are responding to your show? And if in fact challenge is important to feeling deeply embedded in a kind of story like this, are people talking about how they are being challenged personally as they work through the show? So curious to hear your responses to that.
Yeah, that's such a great question. It's so interesting. I've seen some of that research about how theater people respond. And it was really noticeable in Dublin, the fourth show in the Dublin run. So we had like a Thursday night, a Friday night, a Saturday night, and those got like more and more raucous. You know, Saturday night was loads of like groups of 10 women, lots of like, yeah, ha, like laughter and stuff. And then so I had that Saturday night with these like really like, yeah, like, you know, because there's all kinds of jokes on patriarchy in this piece and stuff. And so there was all these women's groups going, yeah. And then on the Sunday, it was this complete industry matinee. It was like the day all the theater people were free, you know, Sunday afternoon. And it was so serious. It was so quiet. It really shocked me. Like for the first 10 minutes, I was like, there hasn't been a laugh in 10 minutes. Okay, I like, just don't, because then, you know, you have that tendency to go for the laughs. I was like, don't do it. Just like hold back, just keep, like, you know, but that was the most dramatic. I noticed that so dramatically. And then I suppose so that time it was very dramatic. Now, ever since, the audiences have been a real mix of, and particularly in Solo Sirens, that's like, again, it's part of the ethos is to really try and have the widest possible audience. We're based in a suburb of Dublin called Tala, and Tala has a kind of has a history of socioeconomic disadvantage. It now has the highest level of immigration into Ireland in the whole country. So it's a great area, really diverse in every way. And our audiences have been so diverse in Tala. So we've always had some industry people, but it's never, I don't think the show's ever had a pure theater audience since. But I must say, I have had many people in theater who have felt personally that they could connect with it. And I think so I think people who come from a theater point of view and don't feel any personal connection study it really seriously, and they're really, and this is all fine too, right? But they're really interested in the installation of the props and the ritualistic nature and the lighting choices. But there's always, there are so often people who say, oh, that story is also my story. I've heard that response so much. And then I have had people say that it made them think, oh, there might be some things in my own past that I haven't confronted yet. And then I've also had young women express a lot of gratitude, and kind of say like, oh, thanks for revealing some of those, like those moments where you opened the wrong door. Like if it was a horror movie, that everybody would be going, don't open the door, So there's always been a really strong response from women kind of like 18 to 25. That's been a very a very core audience group, I think.
Yeah, I was wondering if some of, because I noticed rhetorically you did, especially at the beginning, you did a lot of like inviting people into imagining themselves, like the princess. The princess talk was always inclusive, right? It always implied that some of you who are watching are also a princess as well. And so I found myself wondering, I wonder if that's part of the power of it, right? That you're inviting people to say, no, that this is you. This is a story about you as well. So I wondered if you felt like maybe that was part of, or you did that on purpose to sort of draw in that kind of response.
Yeah, it's so interesting. If I'm totally honest, I think some of that started at the beginning because I was so uncomfortable about doing an autobiographical piece. I felt so self-indulgent, and I was like, I have to keep being like, I'm not just talking about me; it's about everyone. Even though I do believe that, right? I do believe it's about everyone. But then, what was reassuring as I started to perform it is that I was like, oh no, it really is about everyone, and it's so much fun to do with a live audience because, you see people react, and you literally get this like we know, right? Like you have these moments of eye contact with someone where you're like, oh yeah, like we've both done this, haven't we? It's just such a beautiful feeling. Like it's just lovely. And I've had audiences like come and give me a big hug after, because we kind of feel like we're buddies, after we've gone through the show together, which has been great.
All right, thank you so much for that question, Scott.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and thank you for everyone for sticking around, and especially to Joe and Jenny, newest members of our expanding RBT family. So lovely to have you, and also a special welcome to Martha and Jennifer for tuning in also from all the way in Dublin. For the rest of us, please stay tuned, pay attention to your emails. We will be having additional RBT events, and we'd love to see you all there. So on behalf of Chris, Sue, myself, and George, thank you so much for taking time out of your day, and I hope you enjoy the rest of it. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody, so much for being here.
Thank you.